The lights in the parking garage died, one row at a time, and Nadia Reyes knew in the half-second before the darkness reached her that she was not alone. She stopped walking. Her heels had been the only sound for 3 floors sharp and certain against the concrete. The sound of a woman who had won again that afternoon. Now even that was gone. The overhead lamps went out in a slow, deliberate ripple, floor by floor, section by section, as if something were unscrewing the city's power with one patient hand. And the last thing she saw, before the dark swallowed the far wall, was her own car, 40 steps away, its silver hood catching the final bar of light. "You should get in the car, Miss Reyes." The voice came from between 2 black sedans she had not noticed a moment ago. It was low and unhurried, a voice that had never once needed to be raised to be obeyed, and it did something to the back of her neck that she chose to call anger. "I have pepper spray and a very good memory for faces," she said. "Step out where I can use both." He did. He stepped out of the space between the cars the way smoke leaves a doorway, and even in the near dark she understood that she had made a mistake because there was nothing here for the pepper spray to frighten. The man was tall and built like something carved rather than born, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, and wearing it as though he had forgotten he had it on. His face was all clean, cold angles, and his eyes, when they found hers, did not move over her body the way men's eyes usually did. They stayed on her face. They stayed there like a hand pressed flat against a window. "You took the Kessler brief this morning," he said. It was not a question. "That's confidential. Give it back." Nadia laughed and hated that it came out thin. "You dragged the power in an entire building to tell me to drop a client you could have sent flowers? A fruit basket? A threatening note in the ordinary way like everyone else who doesn't want me in a courtroom. I am not threatening you." He said it quietly, and the quiet was the frightening part. "If I wanted to frighten you, Miss Reyes, you would already be frightened, and you would not remember me doing it. I am asking you. Once. Walk away from this case. Give me one reason." He was silent for a long moment. Somewhere far below, an engine turned over and idled, waiting for him. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. And the change was the thing she would lie awake thinking about later. Because it was not the voice of a man protecting himself. It was the voice of a man standing between someone and an oncoming train. "Because some verdicts cost more than even you can afford to win," he said. "And you will not see the bill until it is far too late to refuse it." Then the lights came back on all of them at once, a flood of ordinary fluorescent white, and the space between the 2 black sedans was empty. The cars pulled away without a sound she could name over the ringing in her own ears. She stood alone in the middle of the garage with her heart slamming and her keys biting into her palm. And she did the thing that had made her the most feared defense attorney in Manhattan, and would very nearly destroy her. She decided she would not be told what to do. Nadia Reyes had not lost a case in 9 years. That was the sentence the newspapers used. The sentence rivals spat pat, the sentence that opened doors on the top floors of glass towers, and closed the mouths of men who had never lost anything either. 9 years, not a single verdict against her. And if you asked her how she would tell you, it was preparation and nerve, that was true. It was also not the whole truth, and the whole truth lived in a small silver frame on the corner of her desk, turned slightly away from the door so that clients could not see it. The photograph showed 2 girls on a dock in summer. The older one, laughing, squinting into the sun, was Nadia at 19. The younger one, mid-jump, caught forever in the instant before the water, was Ruby. Ruby had died 6 winters ago on the Hollis Creek Bridge upstate, on a clear night with dry roads, when her car left the lane and went through the guardrail and into the black water below. No other vehicle, the report said, no alcohol, no mechanical fault in what the water gave back. A tragic single-car accident, the county called it, and closed the file, and Nadia had spent the 6 years since learning every law they had used to close it, so that she could pry it open again with her bare hands. She had become a lawyer for one reason, underneath all the others. She could not stand a story that did not add up. Ruby's story had never added up. And she had promised the girl in the photograph more times than she could count that she would never stop pulling the thread. She did not yet know that the thread ran directly into the hand of the man she had just refused in the dark. The Kessler case was a monster. And monsters were her favorite kind of client because monsters paid, and monsters made headlines, and headlines were how a girl from a nothing town became untouchable. Adrian Kessler was a name that meant money in the parts of the city where money learned to whisper. Real estate, shipping a foundation with his name carved over a hospital wing. And now, a charge that had made the front page of every paper for a week straight because a man named David O., a mid-level accountant who had been about to testify to a federal committee about where some of Kessler's money slept at night, had driven his car off the West Side Highway at 70 miles an hour into a bridge piling and died on impact. The prosecution said the brakes had been cut. The prosecution said Adrian Kessler had given the order. And Adrian Kessler, who could have hired any of 100 silver-haired men in 100 wood-paneled firms, had reached across the whole city and asked for Nadia Reyes by name. She met him for the first time in a conference room the color of bone 2 days after the parking garage, and she remembered thinking that he was disappointing. That was the word her mind chose. He was handsome in an ordinary, expensive way, tanned gray at the temples, with soft hands and a soft, patient smile. And he thanked her for taking his case with the warmth of a man thanking a waiter. He looked her in the eye and told her he was innocent, and he was very good at it. The best she had ever seen, and that alone should have warned her. The good ones were never the ones who sweated. "They need a villain," Kessler said, folding those soft hands on the table. "Men like me are convenient villains. You understand that better than most, I think. You make your living understanding it." "I make my living winning," Nadia said. "Guilt and innocence are the prosecutor's problem. Reasonable doubt is mine." Something moved behind his eyes when she said it. A flicker of something that was almost amusement, almost appetite gone before she could name it. "Yes," he murmured. "That is exactly why I wanted you. Precisely you. I want you to understand that. I chose you for a reason, Miss Reyes." She thought it was flattery. She would remember those words much later in a dark courtroom, with the floor tilting under her, and she would understand that they had been a knife laid gently on the table between them from the very first hour, and that he had watched her fail to see it and enjoyed it. Damien Cross was at the arraignment. She saw him in the back row of the gallery, and her whole body knew him before her mind caught up the way you know the shape of a person who has already frightened you once. He sat very still in the dark wood room, hands loose on his knees, watching the proceedings with the flat attention of a man reading a document he already knew the ending of. He was not on any list. He was not press, not family, not counsel. He was simply there occupying his seat as if the building had been built around it, and no one, not the bailiffs, not the clerks, not the 2 federal marshals by the door, so much as glanced at him, which told her more about who he was than a name ever could. She cornered him in the marble hall afterward, because she had never once in her life walked away from a thing that scared her. "You're following me." "I'm attending a public hearing," Damien said. He did not turn to face her fully. He watched her sidelong, and up close in the cold courthouse light she could see that he was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. It lived under his eyes like a debt. "There's a difference, though I understand why the difference is lost on you at the moment." "Who are you?" "No one you want to know. Try me." He looked at her then fully, and for one unguarded second, the cold went out of his face, and left something underneath it that she was completely unprepared for. Because it was not menace, and it was not desire. It was grief. It was the specific, exhausted tenderness of a man looking at something he had already lost, and was watching lose itself all over again. Then the shutter came down, and he was stone again. "Drop the case, Miss Reyes," he said softly. "I will not ask you a third time. And when you refuse me again, and you will, because refusing is the only muscle you have ever fully trusted, I want you to remember one thing. Whatever happens after this, however much you come to hate me, I tried. In the garage and here and every day after this that you will never see, I tried." He walked away before she could answer, and his footsteps made no sound at all on the marble, and she stood in the cold hall, gripping her briefcase, and telling herself the thing she felt was rage. It was not rage. She simply did not yet have another word for a man who looked at her as if her heart were already breaking, and he was the only one in the room who could hear it. The witnesses began to disappear after the 3rd week. The first was a dock worker named Emile, who had signed a statement placing one of Kessler's drivers near Ost's garage the night the brakes were cut. Nadia's investigator, a patient former detective named Marisol, went to serve him a subpoena and found his apartment cleaned out to the walls, rent paid, a year forward in cash, no forwarding address, as if the man had been erased by a wet cloth. The second was the mechanic who had inspected the wreck. He simply did not come to the door anymore, and then the door had a new name on it. The third, a woman who had claimed to overhear a phone call, called Nadia's office in tears to recant everything she had ever said, and then changed her number. Each time it happened, Nadia got closer to something. That was the pattern she could not stop seeing. She would pull a thread, find a name, a date, a place, and reach for it, and the thread would go slack in her hand because whatever it was tied to had been quietly, expensively removed from the world. And each time when she looked up, some trace of Damien Cross was nearby. A black car idling across from a witness's building the day before it emptied. His name or the shadow of it in a hotel register. Once, a single glove left on the seat of her own car, which she never locked because she had always believed locking things was for the guilty, sitting there like a calling card, like a man telling her he could reach into her life whenever he chose. She built a theory because building theories was what she did, and the theory was simple and wrong, and it nearly killed her. Damien Cross worked for Kessler. The disappearing witnesses were being silenced to protect her client, and the strange man in the garage had come to warn her off not to save her, but to keep her from stumbling into the machinery. The grief in his face was guilt. It fit almost perfectly, and the small places where it did not, the tenderness the word tried, the way he never once threatened her, when threatening her would have been easy. She filed away under things she would deal with after she won. She was so busy being the smartest person in every room that she never once asked the only question that mattered. Not who is he protecting, but who is he protecting me from? The gala was at the Fontaine, a museum of a hotel off the park, and she went because half of Kessler's alibi lived among the people who would be there, and because she had never learned how to be somewhere loud and glittering without working. She wore green and she wore it like armor, and she was 3 sentences into charming a man who might swear Kessler had been at his table the night Ost died, when the whole ballroom seemed to lean imperceptibly toward the door. Damien Cross had arrived. She understood watching it happen exactly what he was. He did not announce himself. He did not have to. Conversation did not stop so much as reorganize itself around him, the way iron filings turn toward a magnet they cannot see. Senators found reasons to drift into his path. A woman with a name on 3 buildings touched his sleeve and laughed too brightly at nothing. This was where he ruled, she realized. Not in the courtrooms, not in the papers, here in the soft gold light where the actual city was bought and sold between courses. He did not run a neighborhood. He ran the men who ran the men who ran the neighborhoods, from behind a wall of diamonds and small talk, and every powerful person in that ballroom was afraid of him. And he crossed the entire floor to stand beside her at the balcony rail where she had gone to breathe. "You shouldn't have come tonight," he said, looking out at the park, not at her. "I go where the case goes. I know. That is the entire problem with you." He said it without heat, almost fondly, the way you might describe an illness in someone you loved. "There are 4 men in this room who were paid to be near you before the night is over. 2 of them work for me, and they are here to make certain the other 2 never get the chance. You will go home tonight thinking nothing happened and you will be right, and the reason you will be right is standing next to you being hated for it." She turned to look at him. The city light caught the tired lines of his face and softened nothing. "Why?" she said. Just that. Not who, not what. Why? For a moment she thought he would tell her. She could see it move through him, the whole weight of whatever he was carrying, rising toward the surface like something breaching. His jaw worked, his hand tightened on the marble rail until the knuckles went pale, and then very deliberately he let it go and put the stone back over his face, one piece at a time. "Because it's my fault you're standing here," he said, "and I would rather you never learned why. Then watch it do to you what it will do." He straightened. "Drop the case, Nadia." It was the first time he had used her name without the miss, and it landed somewhere under her ribs and stayed there warm and unwelcome. She opened her mouth to fire something back, something clever and cutting, the thing she always had ready. The lights in the ballroom flickered. It was nothing assuaged the chandelier's stuttering for half a breath, and the crowd made the soft, collective sound a crowd makes at small darkness. But Damien moved before the light was even fully back, and the movement was so fast and so total that she did not process it as movement at all. One instant he was beside her at the rail, the next his body was between her and the room, one arm swept back to fold her behind him against the balcony wall, his other hand somewhere inside his jacket, and every muscle in him had gone from stillness into a single drawn line pointed at the far doors. She felt the wall of his back against her, felt the tension in it, the readiness, the absolute animal certainty of a man who had already decided he would take whatever was coming before it reached her. Then the lights steadied. A waiter had tripped a breaker, laughter rolled back through the ballroom. And Damien Cross did not move for 3 full seconds longer than he needed to, standing there with his body wrapped around the space she occupied, his breath gone ragged, and when he finally stepped back and turned to look at her, the stone was gone from his face, and he did not have time to put it back, and what was underneath it stopped her heart. He looked at her the way a man looks at the one thing he has organized his entire ruined life around keeping alive. "Go home," he said hoarse. "Please." She went home. She did not sleep. She sat on the floor of her apartment with Ruby's photograph in her lap and Damien's face behind her eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, she felt the ground she had built her certainty on move very slightly, the way a floor moves in the second before you understand the building is coming down. The truth came to her in a courier's envelope, which was almost funny because she had spent 6 years and a fortune and every skill she owned chasing it. And in the end it arrived by hand at 9 in the morning, between a motion to suppress and a cup of cold coffee. The trial was in its 2nd week and going for her beautifully. She had cut the prosecution's timeline into ribbons. She had made their star witness contradict himself twice before lunch. The papers had started using the word acquittal, and Kessler had started smiling in a way she was too busy winning to examine. She was, by any measure she had ever used, 48 hours from the 10th clean year of her career, and the envelope on her desk had no return address, only her name in a hand she did not know, and a single line beneath it, "For Ruby." Inside were 3 things. A photograph, old, its corners soft with handling. A copy of a New York State driver's license issued 11 years earlier to a man named Julian Vance, and a page torn from a county accident report she knew by heart because she had read it 10,000 times, the report on the death of her sister on the Hollis Creek Bridge. The license photograph and the man in the old photograph, and the man sitting 20 feet away at the defense table, with soft hands and a patient smile, were the same man. The world did not end all at once. It ended in pieces the way real things do. First, she understood that Julian Vance and Adrian Kessler were the same person, one name shed like a skin. Then from the old photograph that the man in it was standing on the Hollis Creek Bridge, her sister's bridge, and that the date printed at the bottom was the week Ruby died. Then the last thing, the thing that took the floor out from under her, which was that this was not a coincidence and had never been one. Ruby had not driven off that bridge, she had been driven off it by a professional, by a man who staged accidents for money. A man whose entire signature was a car that leaves a lane on a clear, dry night. A man who had done it to David Oast on the West Side Highway exactly as he had done it to her sister 6 winters before, and who had then, cornered and needing the best defense lawyer alive, reached across the entire city and asked for the dead girl's sister by name. "I chose you for a reason." The room went to a long, ringing silence, and she was standing, though she did not remember standing. The pages were in her hand, and then they were not. They were falling, sliding off the edge of the folder and fanning out across the dark wood floor of the courtroom, the photograph landing face up between her feet, Ruby's killer smiling up at her in black and white, and she could not make her hand reach for any of it. The judge was saying her name. Kessler had turned in his chair. She saw his face and the patience was gone from it, and what was underneath was worse than anything she had prepared for, because he was not afraid. He was delighted. He had known. He had always known. He had sat at that table for 2 weeks and watched her fight for his freedom with her whole heart, and it had been for him the finest entertainment money could buy. The girl scrubbing the blood off his hands and not knowing it was her sister's. And in the back row of the gallery, in the seat the building had been built around, Damien Cross closed his eyes. He did not look surprised. He did not look away. He simply closed his eyes slowly, the way a man does when a thing he has spent years trying to hold back finally arrives, and lets it. And in that small, terrible gesture, she read the entire shape of everything he had done. The garage, the gala, the witnesses who vanished the moment before they could hand her this exact truth in some crueler, more public way. Every warning, every please. He had known. He had known from the beginning who her client was, and what he had done and to whom, and he had spent every day of the trial standing between her and this photograph, not to protect Kessler, never to protect Kessler, but to keep her from being the one who set her sister's murderer free with her own 2 hands. He had made the witnesses disappear so she could not find the thread and pull it in open court, where the whole world would watch her realize it. He had begged her to drop the case, so that she would never have to stand where she was standing now. He had chosen to let her hate him, rather than let this happen to her. And it had happened anyway. The judge called a recess. Marisol got an arm around her and out through the side door into an empty witness room, and Nadia sat in a hard plastic chair and did not cry, because she had gone somewhere past crying, into the cold, clear place where she did her best and most dangerous thinking. She understood her situation with perfect clarity. She was defense counsel of record for the man who had murdered her sister. In 2 days, on the strength of her own brilliant work, he would very likely walk free, and once acquitted for Ost, he could never be tried for it again, and the Ruby file was 6 years cold and would never be reopened. Every instinct she had trained for 9 years told her the same thing. Withdraw, recuse, do it by the book, protect yourself, and let the system fail her sister one final time, the way it had failed her at every turn. She sat with that for a long time. Then she took out her phone and made a call, and the man who answered on the first ring, as though he had been holding the phone for hours, was Damien Cross. "Where are you?" she said. "Outside, in the rain, where I have been most nights for longer than you would believe." "Come up." They met on the roof of a parking structure across from the courthouse, because she could not stand the thought of walls, and it was raining, a thin, cold Manhattan rain that turned every light into a smear. He was waiting when she came through the stairwell door, standing at the edge with his back to the city, and he did not pretend not to have been crying, which undid her more than anything else could have. "Say it," she told him. "All of it. Now." So he did. He had been hunting Julian Vance for 11 years. Vance had killed for Damien's people once, long ago, when Damien was young and had not yet learned what he was standing on top of. And then Vance had turned and killed the one man in that world Damien had ever loved like a father, and vanished into money and new names. And Damien had spent the decades since taking apart the entire underworld of the eastern seaboard, one contact at a time, hunting a ghost who staged accidents. That was how he had found Ruby, not the other way around. He had been pulling the thread of Vance's old jobs, the clean ones, the ones that never became cases. And one of them was a girl on a bridge upstate, and there had been a sister, the report said, a sister who would not let it go. A sister who had walked into every police station in 3 counties with a folder under her arm and been turned away. A sister who had then impossibly become a lawyer so that no one could ever turn her away again. "I came to watch you once," he said. The rain ran down his face and he let it. "Only once. I told myself it was diligence, a loose end. I sat in the back of a courtroom to see whether Ruby Reyes' sister was a danger to my hunt or a use to it." He laughed, a broken sound. "You were defending a boy everyone in that room had already convicted. 19 years old, no money, no chance, and you took them apart. Not because he was innocent, he wasn't, and not for money, there wasn't any. You did it because the story they told about him didn't add up and you could not stand it. I watched you burn down a case for a stranger because a thing was untrue, and I understood that you had been doing that every day for years, for one reason, and the reason was a girl on a bridge you were never going to stop trying to save." He looked at her, and the city wept behind him. "I have loved you for 6 years, Nadia. From across rooms, from the backs of galleries, from the street outside your window in the rain. I know how you take your coffee, and I know you don't lock your car. And I know you keep her turned away from the door so clients can't see her. I never wanted you to know any of it. Men like me do not get to want things out loud. We only get to keep them alive from a distance. I was going to give you Vance. That was going to be the whole of it. I was going to find him and end him quietly, and you would read one day that a businessman named Kessler had died in some accident, and you would feel something loosen in your chest that you couldn't explain. And you would go on and never know that the thing that had finally let your sister rest was standing outside in the rain, loving you and asking for nothing. "And then he hired me," she said. "And then he hired you." Damien's voice went to gravel. He knew. God help me, he knew everything. He had done his own hunting. He found out I was close, and he found out about you. And he reached for you on purpose, because he is the kind of thing that finds it funny using the sister to launder her sister's blood. The moment I heard your name attached to his, I knew I had two ways left. Tell you and watch it destroy you in a courtroom in front of the world, which is where it would have happened. Because you are too good, you would have found it. Or stop you. Frighten you off, buy you time, bury every thread before you could reach it, kill the case some other way, and get you clear of the whole thing without you ever knowing what you had nearly done. He wiped the rain from his eyes with the back of his hand, a strangely boyish gesture in a man built like a weapon. I chose wrong. I chose to be the villain you could survive instead of handing you the truth you couldn't. And you found it anyway. You always find it. It's the thing I love most about you, and it is the thing that is going to take you from me. For a long moment there was only the rain. Then Nadia said, "You've had 11 years to kill him. Why is he still breathing?" "Because if he dies now, in the middle of a murder trial, with me anywhere near it, it points at me, and it points at you, and it points at a motive with your sister's name on it. And the one thing I will not do is trade his life for yours. I have been waiting for the trial to end, for him to walk and relax and stop being watched by the whole city, and then quietly, an accident, his own signature returned to sender." He said it flatly, a man describing a chore. That was the plan. Let him win, let you win, and take him from the world a month later when no one was looking, and keep you clean. "Let me win," she repeated. "You were going to let me free the man who killed Ruby and murder him afterward, so that I would never have to know I had lost?" "Yes, so that I could keep my perfect record. So that you could keep your soul," he said, and his voice finally broke all the way through. "I did not care about your record. I cared that you would spend the rest of your life knowing your hands had set him loose, and I could not let you carry that when I could carry it instead. I have carried worse. I am already damned, Nadia. There was room." She stood in the rain and looked at this man who ran a city from the shadows and had organized his entire monstrous life around the impossible project of keeping one grief off her shoulders. And she understood that no one had ever loved her like this, so completely and so wrongly, and that she could not let him do it. "No," she said. "Nadia, no. You don't get to carry it, and I don't get to be free of it by being kept stupid. That's not mercy. That's just a nicer cage." She stepped toward him, and the rain was between them, and then it wasn't, and she put her hand flat on his chest, over the heart that had apparently belonged to her for 6 years without her knowing. "There's a third way. You never even looked at it because you're so busy being the thing that stands in front of the train that you forgot I drive one too." He stared at her. "What third way?" "I'm going to lose," she said. Nadia Reyes went back into that courtroom 2 days later and did the thing that ended the only life she had ever been good at, and she did it flawlessly. Because if she was going to burn her record to the ground, she was going to do it the way she did everything, better than anyone alive. She did not withdraw. Withdrawing would have handed Kessler a mistrial, and a fresh lawyer, and a second chance. She did not go to the prosecution with the envelope, because the envelope alone proved nothing a defense attorney could not have manufactured, and because a cornered Vance would simply vanish again into another name the moment the wind changed. She did something far more dangerous and far more her. She stayed on as his lawyer, smiling reassuringly the picture of a woman 2 days from another victory, and she used the one thing a defense attorney has that no one else in the building does. She used her access to her own client. She had 2 days, and she spent them not sleeping, and what she built was not a defense, it was a door. Working with Damien, who could reach records and men and old ghosts no prosecutor could ever subpoena, she assembled the thing 11 years of hunting had never quite closed the connection between Julian Vance and a string of clean deaths across 3 states, the accountant, the dock worker, a woman in Albany, a girl on a bridge, all with the same fingerprint, a car leaving a dry lane on a clear night. Vance had spent a decade making sure no single person could ever hold all the pieces at once, but no one had thought to give them to the one lawyer alive, who already knew where every body was, because she had spent 6 years mapping the ground around one of them. On the last morning of the trial, Nadia Reyes stood up to deliver a closing argument that everyone in the room believed would set Adrian Kessler free. She looked at the jury. She looked at the prosecution, who had already begun, in the small ways lawyers can read to concede. She looked at Kessler, who gave her his patient, delighted little smile. The smile of a man being carried across a finish line on the back of the sister of the girl he had killed. And then she turned to the judge and she said the words that no defense attorney in that building had ever heard another one say. "Your Honor, I move to withdraw as counsel, effective immediately, and I request to be sworn as a witness for the prosecution." The room came apart. The judge's gavel, Kessler halfway out of his chair, the patience gone, the mask gone, the animal underneath it finally fully in the room. The prosecutor on his feet, not understanding his own good fortune, and Nadia standing very still in the center of it, the only calm thing in the storm she had made, because she had known this exact chaos was coming, and had planned every second of it the way she planned everything. She could not testify to what she had learned as his lawyer. She knew that. Privilege would gag her, and Kessler's next attorney would move to bury it, and the judge would sustain, and none of what she had built could be spoken by her mouth in that room. But she had never intended it to be. That was the trap inside the trap. The sealed evidence she had spent 2 days routing to the prosecution's own investigators through a dozen clean, unprivileged, unerasable channels. The envelope, the license, the county report, the 11 years of pattern, all of it verifiable without her, was already, as of that morning, in the hands of a federal task force that had wanted Julian Vance for a decade and had never had his face. She had not needed to win. She had needed to blow the whole thing open in front of enough witnesses that it could never be quietly buried again. And to do it in the one moment Vance could not run, standing in a courtroom, surrounded by marshals, mid-trial, mask off, in front of the press. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Kessler understood a half-second before anyone else, because men like him always did. And he moved for the side door with the smooth speed of a man who had escaped a dozen closing nets. He got 4 steps. Then a man rose from the gallery to block the aisle. A quiet man in a good suit who worked for Damien Cross, and another by the side door, and a third. And Kessler stopped in the middle of the courtroom he had turned into a game, surrounded now not by his money, but by hers and Damien's and the law's all at once. And for the first time in 11 years, Julian Vance had nowhere left to become someone else. He looked at Nadia across the dark wood floor. "I chose you," he said, and it was almost wondering, almost hurt, the closest thing to human she would ever see in him. The sister. Do you understand what a gift that was? You were going to save me. It was going to be perfect. "I know," Nadia said. "You told me on the first day. You wanted me to understand. So understand this." She let the silence stretch until even he leaned into it. "I never lose." They took him out through the front, through the cameras, and it was on every screen in the city by nightfall. It did not go cleanly, of course, because nothing in his world ever did. Vance had one card left, the card men like him always keep. A man on the outside who owed him and had nothing left to lose. As the marshals brought Vance down the courthouse steps into the rain and the light, the man came out of the crowd with a gun. Not for Vance, for her, because Vance had spent his last favor not to save himself, but to take from her the same thing he had taken before, out of pure spite, because it was the only thing left he could still do. And Damien Cross, who had been standing at the bottom of the steps for an hour, where no one had told him to stand, who had spent 6 years learning the exact shape of the space Nadia Reyes occupied, so that he could put himself in front of it, was already moving before the gun cleared the man's coat. She did not see him cross the distance. She felt it. She felt the world turn to noise and light, felt something enormous and certain wrap around her and drive her down and sideways into the shelter of the stone steps. Felt the flat, terrible cracks of the shots and the heavier sound of a body deciding to be a wall. And when the noise stopped and she got her eyes open, she was on the wet stone with Damien Cross curled around her, his back to the danger, his arms a cage, his blood, she realized, going warm and dark across the shoulder of his beautiful ruined suit and onto her hands. The shooter was already down. Damien's men had seen to that. But Damien himself had gone gray and heavy, and he was looking at her, with the stone finally fully gone from his face, and what was underneath it now was only relief, vast and simple, the relief of a man who has finally, after 11 years, gotten to the front of the train in time. "There," he said. His voice was very far away. "There. You see, I told you I tried. Don't." Her hands were pressed to his shoulder to the heat of him, and this time it was Nadia Reyes who did the thing she had never once in her life been able to do, which was beg. "Don't you dare. You do not get to spend 6 years loving me from across a room and then do this. Look at me. Look at me. You said there was room to carry things. There's room for this too. There's room for you to stay." And Damien Cross, who feared nothing, who had organized an empire and his own damnation around the single project of keeping her alive, looked up at Nadia Reyes in the rain on the courthouse steps, with the whole city screaming around them, and did the bravest thing he had ever done. He decided to want something out loud. "Stay," he said. "Not me. You. I've done my staying. Now you. Don't go anywhere I can't reach you. That's all I ever—" His hand found hers in the blood in the rain. "That's all." The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder and out again, and touched nothing that could not be sewn, though she would not know that for 2 hours. 2 hours she spent refusing to leave Damien's blood dried to her palms, and her sister's photograph somehow still in her coat pocket, until a tired surgeon came out and told her the man would live. Then she went into a supply closet by herself, and finally, 6 years late, wept for Ruby, because it was finished, and because someone had loved her enough to let her be the one to finish it. Julian Vance never saw the outside of a courtroom again. The federal file that arrived on the courthouse steps that morning was too complete and too public to bury, and it opened, among other things, a cold, single-car accident on the Hollis Creek Bridge upstate, 6 winters gone. Nadia Reyes lost her perfect record the day she moved to withdraw, and every legal commentator in the city called it the end of her career. The greatest self-inflicted defeat they had ever seen. A woman who threw away 9 years and a certain acquittal for reasons no one could quite make add up. She could have told them. The story added up perfectly. It was the only case she had ever taken that she had needed with her whole soul to lose. They were married in the spring, quietly, with no diamonds and no gala, and no one from the rooms behind the rooms in a garden by the water, where you could see, if you knew to look, a bridge in the far distance. Damien wore the arm in a way that still favored the shoulder, and he stood at the front and watched her come toward him with the same expression he had worn in the back of that first courtroom, the tenderness he had spent years hiding, except that now he let her see it. Now he let the whole small crowd see it. A man who had stopped standing in the shadows and stepped at last into the light, where she was. Nadia kept the silver frame on the desk in her new office, the one where she took only the cases that did not add up, the hopeless ones, the ones with no money in them, the girls on bridges no one else would fight for. She kept it turned toward the door now. She wanted clients to see it. She wanted them to know exactly who they were dealing with. A woman who had lost precisely one case in her entire life, on purpose, magnificently, and had gained in the losing the only 2 things she had ever truly wanted: the truth about her sister, and the man in the rain who had loved her the whole time she was learning it.